What's traditionally known as the helping or sagging man-to-man defense, which from here on forward we will be reconstituting in gender-neutral terms as the helping player-on-player defense, has been tried, tested, and true, and is the staple defense used most often by intermediate caliber coaches and players through to advanced. First things first, defenders should run to the hole, which is this area right here, and call out or communicate an individual check to cover, usually the closest opponent, as the ball enters the defensive zone. We always tell players, don't park, meaning don't go and wait in a certain area of the floor, assuming your check will come to you, such as in a house defense. Defenders need to be proactive and vocal when it comes to calling out their check. If defenders fail to account for the number of offensive players and get hyper-focused on the ball, also known as ball watching, it usually leads to players wide open behind them and the ball in the back of their net. On the flip side, if you have defensive numbers, meaning more players in the hole on defense than offensive players in the zone, this is a license to venture out and put pressure on the ball, with experienced players recognizing the opportunity to double-team the ball carrier before their check enters the offensive zone. When defensive teammates also lock off adjacent passing outlets, it's a done deal. Once all defenders have established a check, they should stay tight as a unit, not getting overextended or spread out too far and therefore exposing the middle of the floor. Do whatever it takes to maintain topside positioning on ball, in a closed stance with hips facing the boards and in line with their check's top shoulder, while also standing in the shooting lane and closing the gap on potential shooters. Off ball, they should be standing in an open stance, meaning their hips are facing up floor, sagging into the middle in line with the far side goalpost, with their sticks up and in the passing lane and heads on a swivel, seeing both the ball and their check. In this clip, typically you would like to see the on-ball low defender inside of the high defender, more like what you see here, where you are inviting the player to take a marginal shot from a 45-degree angle off the post, also known as a seam shot. Good players generally won't take this shot, and goalies are expected to stop it. Bad things happen when the low defender on ball chases out into the corner. Usually they either get picked off with lots of space behind them to pass to the roller, or the defender simply gets beat underneath where there's no help, as you can see in this clip. Generally, the rule for the on-ball low defender is to be as low as the lowest offensive player. In a case like this, which we call an empty crease setup by the offense, the low defender has to start all the way up at the shooter position beside the high defender versus parking at the crease, eventually falling back to their underneath responsibilities when required. Another reason why the low defender should stay tucked in or inside of the high defender is so that they don't leave players alone behind them on top of the crease. They need to keep their head on a swivel as much as anyone else, staying in the shooting lanes as much as possible, but also not losing sight of their check, who may periodically try to sneak behind them. Bad things can also happen when the opponent beats the high defender over top, leaving them open in the middle of the prime scoring area. This will happen when defenders are in an open stance on ball, which can happen quite easily off of a swing pass, as you can see in this clip, or even when you're in a closed stance but you aren't in line with the ball carrier's top shoulder. Other common occurrences for getting beat topside are when a defender lunges on a cross check, leaving them off balance, when they get picked and try to stay on their check instead of switching, when they get sealed and don't fight over top, and generally on any lack of communication. At any given point during a defensive shift, players might potentially find themselves defending any part of the floor, the crease position low, the shooter position high, the point or the middle, depending on where their check goes and whether or not they are able to switch. The team rule is automatic switching. Switch on everything or switch as much as possible, both on ball and off ball, unless it's communicated otherwise. The communication to your teammate in that case being stay, stay, stay. The reason for the automatic switch is that when players get tired, they will inevitably stop communicating, and fundamentally, they should know that a switch is expected. The classic switch is to pass players down to the teammate lower than you in the wall, with players constantly communicating whether they are high, low, or on the three-player side, middle, when there may be any doubt to who has what responsibility. To defend a pick and roll, it takes two defenders being aware of the situation. The defender whose check is setting a pick on their teammate, usually the lower of the two defenders relative to the net, needs to let them know that the pick is coming, communicating pick left, pick right, or it's on your back. The defender being picked also needs to have their head on a swivel and see it coming. When both defenders do their job, it usually makes for an easy switch and a crisis averted. However, when one player doesn't do their job, breakdowns are bound to happen, and when both players don't do their job, breakdowns are inevitable. Aside from communicating the pick and seeing it coming, we teach defenders being picked to turn and clamp the picker, running with them to the net, which ultimately takes away the roll option. Likewise, we teach the defender whose check is setting the pick to jump switch, which means to fire out north-south in orientation versus east-west, which closes the gap on the shooter and usually deters them from shooting. Another option is for bigger defenders to blow up the picker and push or cross-check them out of the way, not allowing them to set the pick in the first place. Here you can see what happens when one player does their job and their teammate doesn't. This is a classic scenario where the high defender tries to stay on their check while being picked instead of looking to turn and clamp, and the low defender jump switches, which is actually their job in this scenario. However, it results in the roller being wide open. Here it is again. I do an inside roll to not allow myself to get back picked, effectively switching, but when my new check goes to repick and my teammate attempts to stay on their new check, whereas I look to jump switch, ultimately I'm forced to recover back to my check when I realize that my teammate's not going to switch, which is risky business. A seal, as you can see here, can also help open up an offensive player for a shot and can happen anywhere on the floor, but generally they happen up high, and it's the responsibility of the high defenders to fight over top of any seals within this defense. A seal is when the opponent tries to push their check backwards towards the goal, as they're entitled to the space just as much as the defender. Ultimately, it allows for their teammate to come over top for an open shot in the middle or a screen shot. Defenders can theoretically choose to fight over top on either the inside or the outside of the seal, ultimately doing whatever it takes to close the gap and get on the hands of the shooter who may be coming over or in some cases under the seal for a shot. Usually it's best to fight over seals on the inside, i.e. closest to the middle, as this way you will ultimately be in topside positioning when you get over top of the seal. However, there are some instances where fighting over the outside of the seal is the shortest and quickest route, with defenders needing to re-establish themselves in a closed stance once they get over it, otherwise risking getting beat topside. Collectively, off-ball defenders should sag into the middle, stay tight, and be prepared to help any teammate that gets beat towards the net adjacent or off-ball, leaving their check entirely and sliding over if required. There is no need to chase one's check out by the boards, as ultimately they will need to come to the middle and get to the net to be a scoring threat. Checking players out wide off ball just leaves more space open in the middle for the offense to take advantage of, and limits their ability to help their teammates. The key defender in the helping player-on-player defense is the off-ball high defender on the weak side, aka the two-player side, and the off-ball middle defender on the strong side, aka the three-player side, sometimes known as the hot defender. Whoever is in either of these positions at any given time should sag off their check and into the middle of the floor more than any other player on the defense. If they position themselves correctly, they should at the very least be able to show help in the middle of the floor and otherwise still be able to recover back to their off-ball check if they catch a pass. Anything can happen on the ball side of the floor, including a player falling, like in this scenario. And in a case like this, saying, "I had my check," simply isn't good enough. At the end of the day, when you commit to helping, it's slide to collide, as they say, with defenders encouraged to take the body as opposed to swinging their stick. Adjacent defenders, meaning the other defenders on the same side as the ball carrier, usually referring to the high defender, also need to show help and ultimately give help to the low defender where possible. Showing help is done in order to discourage the opponent from trying to go one-on-one to the net at the crease position, which good offensive players will do when they realize the high defender isn't in position to help, usually on the weak side, aka the two-player side. Having an off-ball hot defender showing help also discourages pick-and-roll attempts in the middle from the offense, as even the most perfectly executed pick and roll can be snuffed out by a hot defender who is aware of the situation. Getting back to off-ball responsibilities here in conclusion, it is important that off-ball players follow cutters hip to the net, and ideally close the gate, as we say, and denying them from cutting over top, keeping everything in front of us. We can't just pass players down to nobody. In other words, switch when there's nobody there to pick up your check. If no pick is set, oftentimes you will have to follow your check to the net, going from high defender to low defender, with all other players on your side bumping up to a higher position in the wall. The last thing I have yet to mention is the role of the off-ball low defender, whose one and only job is to lock off the crease, meaning not to let any passes get through for backdoor quick sticks or backdoor cutters due to ball watching. That said, they can only venture out so far to cut off a pass because if the ball gets swung over to their side, they need to be able to tuck back in and help or block a shot. At the end of the day, the ultimate goal of any defense is not to get scored on as a team. I had my check is just not good enough. In essence, individual defenders are responsible for 1.5 players at any given time, your check as well as half of one of your teammates if they need help.